When a trail closes, the sign always blames the same thing: safety, rockfall danger, unstable ground, fragile habitat. But safety isn't silence, and silence isn't the same as empty. Across America's national parks, there are paths that don't just stop, they're cut off. Fences and locked gates, chains across old trailheads, warning boards with no real explanation. No fresh landslide, no active wildlife threat. Just absence, and the feeling that something on the other side is still moving. Officially, most of these closures are temporary, hazards to be reassessed, areas under restoration. Unofficially, some of those trails never opened again. Their names were dropped from new maps, their stories were folded into quiet paperwork and filed away. So before we go any further, lock your doors, put on your headphones, because after this video, you will never see a trail closed sign the same way again. We're about to walk 6 paths you're not supposed to take, at least not with your feet, deep inside the Great Smoky Mountains, past the souvenir stands, beyond the busy tourist trails where the asphalt finally gives up. There's a road that ends too early. The pavement just stops, the trees close in, and behind them, hidden in the undergrowth, is a suburb that never got the memo it was over. This is Elkmont. 100 years ago, Elkmont was summer in a box. Wealthy Knoxville families built dozens of cabins here in the 1,910 seconds, lining the little river like a miniature neighborhood dropped in the woods. Screened porches, painted railings, neat stone chimneys. It looked less like wilderness and more like someone had lifted a street out of a city and set it gently in the forest. At night, the windows glowed warm and yellow. Music floated out over the water. When the national park was created in 1934, the people of Elkmont didn't have to leave right away. The government bought the land, but granted lifetime leases. Families kept coming back, year after year, watching their children grow up and their cabins age. But leases don't last as long as memories. By the 1,980 seconds, the final agreements expired. One by one, the residents left. The government bought every home, evacuated every family, and locked every door. Signs went up, closed for restoration. Then the years passed. The restoration never did. Today, half the cabins are gone. The others sit sealed, windows boarded not just on the outside, but from within, as if something in there shouldn't see out. The forest has shouldered its way back in, swallowing old driveways and porches, turning sidewalks into moss. But every few months, in a place with no power, something inside still turns on. It started in 1982, a year after the last resident left. Rangers on patrol reported faint lights flickering behind the windows of the old Millionaire's Row cabins. Soft, yellow, like kerosene lanterns. They assumed trespassers, but when they checked the doors, the locks were unbroken. The dust inside lay undisturbed on every surface. By 1984, motion sensors were installed around the village to catch vandals. They didn't catch vandals. They caught movement inside locked structures. The National Park Service chalked it up to small animals until one ranger saw it with his own eyes. He was walking past the Levi Trentham cabin when every window lit up at once. Not a flicker, not a passing car reflection, every pane filling with light. As he stepped closer, the air temperature dropped sharply, the kind of cold you feel in your teeth. Then the lights began to move, not dim, not blink, move, like lanterns being carried slowly from room to room, pacing from corner to corner. When he reached the porch, the lights cut out. His radio crackled as he called it in. The next morning, the interior was inspected. No footprints in the dust, no heat signatures, just a faint scent of ozone, the sharp metallic tang that hangs in the air after lightning. In 1992, infrared cameras were added to watch the empty houses. They didn't record living intruders. They recorded silhouettes, human-shaped shadows, standing motionless near the windows, visible only in thermal range. The files were archived, then quietly removed from the Ranger database the following year. Locals who still hike near the site say they hear doors closing at night. One man swears he heard an old Victrola playing from inside a cabin that no longer exists. The official reason for the closure is structural instability. But in 2017, even some newly restored, perfectly safe cabins were abruptly sealed again after dark. When someone asked why, a park spokesperson answered, "It's safer if no one stays there after dark." Maybe Elkmont isn't haunted by ghosts. Maybe it's haunted by its own timeline stuck between preservation and erasure, replaying evenings that should have ended decades ago. The electricity was cut long ago, but the lights still come on. Sometimes they flicker in sequence, like a heartbeat traveling through the trees. Other times, they all flare at once, bright enough to paint the river gold. Maybe it's memory. Maybe it's static, trapped in old wiring and wood. Or maybe Elkmont never really went dark. Maybe the park just learned how to turn it off whenever someone gets too close. Leave Elkmont behind, and the park gets quieter in a different way. Not the silence of empty porches, but the silence of a place that doesn't want to be found at all. There's a valley in the Smokies that used to be passed around like a secret among hikers. They called it a hidden gem. The maps called it nothing. White Oak Sink. It's a collapsed pocket of land tucked between ridges, reachable only by an unmarked path that threads through dense forest. You didn't stumble onto White Oak Sink, you had to be told how to get there. Those who did said it felt like stepping out of time. Wildflowers crowded the basin in spring, waterfalls dripped down limestone, and the air settled around you so still it was like the world outside had been paused. For decades, it was just that. A quiet, beautiful sinkhole. Then, in 2014, the government closed it. The sign went up with an easy explanation. Ecological protection. A mysterious fungus known as white nose syndrome was devastating bat colonies across the country. To save what remained, the park sealed off caves where the bats roosted. White Oak Sink was one of them. The story made sense, on paper. But what started as a conservation effort turned into something stranger. That winter, biologists returned to check the sealed entrances and retrieve data from their motion sensors. Bats are creatures of habit. Their activity spikes at dusk, and just before dawn, but the sensors at White Oak Sink kept triggering between midnight and 3 a.m., a dead zone for wildlife. When the team pulled the data, they saw something they didn't expect. The vibrations weren't registering around the cave mouths, like animals rustling or wings beating. They were coming from deep inside, slow, steady pulses, like somebody walking at an unnervingly even pace, back and forth in the dark, far under the rock. By 2016, audio sensors were added. That's when the sound began. Low-frequency pulses, barely audible, repeating every 9 seconds. The noise didn't match water runoff. It didn't change with rainfall, temperature, or seasons. It didn't care if it was winter or summer. It just kept beating. The deeper sensors picked up another tone beneath it, a faint metallic resonance, like a bell struck somewhere underground, the ring traveling through solid limestone. Then the hum arrived. From the largest sealed chamber, microphones began to detect a continuous tone, almost too low for human ears. It would rise slowly, peak, and fade, always lasting exactly 6 minutes and 24 seconds before stopping and starting the cycle over again. When researchers plotted it on a spectrogram, the shape of the waveform was eerily familiar. It resembled a heartbeat, not random noise. A pattern. Scientists from the University of Tennessee analyzed the recordings. Their report included one line that didn't belong in a geology paper. Acoustic emission pattern, inconsistent with known geological processes, possible anthropogenic or mechanical source. Shortly after, the National Park Service tightened the closure. No tours, no research permits, no photography. Hazardous conditions, they said. Unstable terrain. Unofficially, rangers still patrol the perimeter at night. One of them, speaking anonymously to a Knoxville journalist, tried to explain what it feels like to stand there. Sometimes you can feel it through the ground, he said. Like the rock is breathing. But whatever it is, it's not in sync with anything alive up here. In 2018, a maintenance team found one of the heavy metal gates at a cave entrance, slightly bent outward. Not broken, not forced. The bolts had stretched, as if the steel had softened from the inside. The air just beyond the gate was warm and humid, vibrating faintly, as though it was sharing space with a distant engine. Headquarters wrote it up as vandalism. Then they expanded the closure to a full quarter-mile exclusion zone. Hikers who stray near the boundary anyway say their compasses twitch, needles jerking a few degrees off north before settling as they step away. Some claim that when they speak, their own voices echo back a fraction of a second too early, as if the cave is answering before they finish. Today, White Oak Sink doesn't appear on the park's public maps. The bats may or may not have returned. The sensors, however, still do their work, sending back faint vibrations every few nights, steady as breathing. Whatever is under those caves isn't decaying, it isn't going dormant. It feels like it's waiting, pacing inside the stone, testing the bars of a gate that used to be open trail. From the breathing caves of the Smokies, the story jumps west, across plains and mountains, to a place that barely looks like anything at all. No lush valley, no drowned town. Just a chain-link fence in the desert, and a government sign that reads like a dare. Do not enter. Federal property. Devil's Hole. On the surface, it's just a dark crack in the rock, a narrow opening in the baked earth on the fringe of Death Valley. Visitors drive past it on the highway and never know it's there. Those who do see it usually think the same thing. That's it? But that fenced-off fissure is one of the strangest places on the continent. Scientists call it the deepest known geothermal fissure in North America. It's also the only natural home of a tiny, endangered fish that shouldn't, by any reasonable logic, still exist. Under sunlight, the water at the bottom glows an eerie turquoise, like a glowing vein under the desert's skin. But don't let the brightness fool you. Nobody knows how far it actually goes. In 1952, U.S. Geological Survey teams tried to measure its depth using weighted cables. The line played out past 500 feet before they lost it. When they reeled the cable back in, it came up frayed and scarred, as though it had been dragged along jagged stone in a space much narrower than they'd lowered it into. In 1962, a diver named Paul Decker descended into Devil's Hole to collect water samples. At around 100 feet, his flashlight beam simply failed to reach the end of the void beneath him. One moment he was shining it on rock, the next he was staring down into what he later described as a hallway with no end, a vertical tunnel of black. Minutes later, topside, the safety line went oddly slack, as if something below had swallowed its weight. Decker resurfaced, shaking, refusing to go back in. He told colleagues he'd heard something in the depths. Not bubbling, not stone-shifting metallic echoes, spaced out, almost rhythmic, like distant machinery thudding on and off far beneath him. Over the years, more than a dozen researchers reported strange anomalies, subtle vibrations through their gear, sudden heat spikes on instruments lowered deep into the water, all at depths they couldn't properly chart. The National Park Service's official language calls these hydrothermal fluctuations. The data tells a stranger story. Thermal cameras show tall, rising columns of heat, as if something below isn't just storing energy, it's producing it. Then came 1976. A small earthquake struck central Nevada. Nothing unusual for the region. But at Devil's Hole, a security camera was pointed straight at the water. Seconds before the seismic waves reached the site, before instruments recorded any shaking, the footage shows the turquoise surface erupting into violent sloshing, waves smashing against the rock in perfect rhythm with a quake that hadn't arrived yet. Devil's Hole didn't react to the earthquake. It anticipated it. After that, public access tightened. The fence became more than a suggestion. Only escorted research teams were allowed inside, timed and monitored. In 1998, 2 college students decided the rules didn't apply to them. They broke in at night, lowered a homemade camera rig down toward the water, and hit record. The footage was later confiscated by authorities, but people who saw it before it disappeared say the audio track captured a deep, resonant hum echoing from below, steady, mechanical, like a powerful engine idling somewhere in the dark. The video cut off mid-frame when the camera's light flickered and died. When rangers finally found the students hours later, they were sitting outside the fence in the dirt, dazed and dehydrated, their equipment ruined. Both insisted they'd heard something calling from below the water, a sound shaped like a voice but not speaking any language they recognized. Neither of them ever returned. Modern sonar still can't map the full depth of Devil's Hole. Instruments stop working long before the bottom appears. At about 450 feet down, the water's temperature rises in a way that defies simple geology, suggesting something down there is generating heat, not just absorbing it. Today, the site is sealed behind locked gates, cameras, and motion sensors. Officially, it's all to protect the delicate Devil's Hole pupfish. Unofficially, no one's eager to admit what the data suggests, that the cavern behaves less like a static pool and more like a living sensor, watching the tectonic pulse of the desert, reacting before the earth itself moves. Locals don't use scientific terms. They call it the throat of the desert, Because every few years, Devil's Hole exhales, the ground trembles, and for a moment it feels like something beneath Death Valley just shifted in its sleep. From the desert's throat, we go back to water. Not a glowing pool in a crack of rock, but an entire valley drowned in the name of progress, where a town was erased from sight, but apparently not from sound. Hazel Creek wasn't meant to disappear. It was a real place, with real lives layered into its hillsides. There were schools where kids dragged their feet on Mondays, a post office where gossip moved faster than the mail, and a church whose bell could be heard for miles when the valley was quiet. Families worked, prayed, argued, and planned futures that assumed the mountains would always be there for them. Then the dam came. In 1943, the federal government approved the construction of Fontana Dam, a massive project meant to power the war effort. 17,000 acres of the Smoky Mountains were marked for flooding. Towns like Hazel Creek stood in the way. By 1948, residents were forced out. Their houses were dismantled or left to rot. Cemeteries were moved, or at least, that's what the paperwork claimed. When the water rose, it ate the rest. The government made a promise to the displaced families: a new road, a way back in. They would be able to visit their old home places, their relocated graves. The road would trace the shoreline and reconnect them to all that had gone underwater. The road was never finished. Instead, the fences went up, area closed. No unauthorized access. For the next 70 years, Hazel Creek existed mostly in memories, family stories, and occasional newspaper features about promises made and never kept. The valley stayed silent, mostly. In 1977, rangers patrolling the lake at night began reporting something they couldn't quite explain. Faint bell sounds echoing over the water. At first, they blamed nearby Bryson City. Sound can do weird things in the mountains: bounce, bend, travel further than it should. But these tones didn't come from town. They came from the middle of the lake, from somewhere beneath the surface. The bell didn't sound like a church tower cutting through air. It was lower, metallic, slightly off-pitch, as if a submerged chime were being struck under pressure. The ring repeated every 64 seconds, like clockwork, always after midnight. Divers were sent to investigate. Hazel Creek's drowned valley is not a friendly place underwater. Visibility drops to 0 below 20 feet, and the silt moves like smoke. Sonar scans traced shapes under the layers of muck-hollow spaces where structures still stood. One reading near the coordinates of the old church showed a dome-shaped cavity, still intact, with what looked like trapped air inside. The divers never made it that far. As they descended, their guidelines began to vibrate, not wildly, but rhythmically, as if something below were tugging in time with the unseen bell. They surfaced early, shaken and short on explanations. The official report attributed it to water current interference. Unofficially, the nickname Belfield started making the rounds. In 1992, a journalist from Asheville slipped into the restricted zone with a hydrophone, a microphone designed to listen underwater. Lowered into the lake, it recorded a series of tones so low they were almost impossible to hear unaided. Subsonic waves rolled through the entire basin. When the audio was played back at adjusted speed, a pattern emerged. 2 short tones, 1 long. 2 short, 1 long. The same rhythm used in maritime distress signals. By 2001, Hazel Creek had been officially designated a non-accessible heritage site. No more diving permits. No more unauthorized research. The line between the public and the past was drawn at the shoreline. Still, locals come. Every year, families gather where the unfinished road gives up at the edge of the water, the pavement sliced off like someone erased the rest of the world with a ruler. They say the air feels heavier there, the water darker. On still days, bubbles will rise from somewhere in the lake's center, slow, deliberate, as if an invisible lung far below is exhaling. The park calls it decomposition gas from old timbers. But there were no timbers near the church. Every few years, someone claims they've heard the bells again. Always at night, always through fog, always the same oddly warped tone, timed with unnerving precision. Maybe it's wind trapped between ridges. Maybe it's the lake playing tricks. Or maybe memory, like sound, doesn't drown. It just waits for the right conditions to rise back up. Hazel Creek was supposed to be forgotten. The town is gone from sight, but the rhythm of what happened there still seems to echo through the water like a signal that never got an answer. From a lake that still rings with drowned bells, we move to a canyon where the echoes don't sound like water or church chimes at all. They sound like something inside the rock itself trying to speak. There's a part of the Grand Canyon you'll never hike. Not because it's too steep, not because the views aren't worth it, because, officially, it doesn't exist anymore. Once, it was called the Marble Canyon Access Trail, a narrow descent carved into polished limestone, a hidden back door that wound between gleaming cliffs and ended at a ledge hanging high over the Colorado River. For 6 brief years, it was open, a favorite of locals who knew which unmarked turn to take. Then, in 1979, it closed. The sign went up with the usual language: trail closed, hazardous conditions, localized collapse, no date for repairs, no plans for reopening, just a metal gate and fresh chains. Hikers who'd walked it dozens of times didn't buy it. They'd seen the rangers before the closure pale, tight-lipped, carrying equipment they didn't normally carry. Seismic sensors, not shovels. The official report mentions 2 missing hikers. A couple from Flagstaff, last seen at the trailhead, their car left neatly parked, their gear mostly still inside. Search teams scoured the rim. They found no bodies, no tracks leading away, nothing that told a normal story. They did find one thing: a camera wedged against a rock halfway down the trail. Most of the film had been ruined by water and time. Only a single photograph could be salvaged. It showed a section of canyon wall glowing faintly, bathed in a diffuse blue-white light that had no obvious source. No flashlight beam, no campfire, just stone that looked lit from within. The timestamp at the bottom read 2:47 a.m. There are no artificial lights in Marble Canyon at 2:47 a.m. Days later, rangers returned with instruments. They found a stretch of trail that had sunk nearly 3 feet in place, not broken apart, not washed out, just gently lowered, like the ground had softened under it and then hardened again. Seismic logs for the night the hikers vanished showed no earthquake, just one sudden, sharp vibration, less than a second long, originating from below the canyon floor. After that, the park stopped pretending the issue was simple. Access was shut down completely. Maps were quietly redrawn. The Marble Canyon Access Trail faded from brochures and guidebooks, replaced by a sterile label on internal charts. Environmental Study Zone, A17. In 1984, a maintenance helicopter flew over the restricted zone at dawn. The crew reported hearing what sounded like human screams ricocheting through the gorge. Audio analysis later showed something else. The sound wasn't human at all. It was harmonically structured, layered frequencies, patterned like machinery grinding against itself in rhythm, stretched and twisted by the canyon walls into something that only resembled a voice. Geologists who've studied the area's stratigraphy noticed another oddity. The rock formations in that segment of canyon vibrate differently. Strike them with a hammer, and they don't just thud, they ring, like glass. And sometimes that ring doesn't fade. It deepens, darkens, as if something further down is answering back. In 2007, a LiDAR scan meant for mapping erosion caught something it wasn't designed to find. A hollow chamber roughly the size of a stadium, buried 800 feet beneath the sealed trail. The data flagged the void, and when the files reached Washington, the relevant scans were stamped confidential, do not release. Hikers, of course, don't read classified labels. In 2012, someone flew a small drone illegally through the perimeter, hugging the old path where the chains sagged. It recorded 11 seconds of footage before the signal died. In the final frozen frame, the camera caught a thin vertical beam of light shining upward through a hairline crack in the canyon floor. Not sunlight, not reflection, but something narrow and concentrated, piercing the rock from below. Then static. Today, the trail is nothing more than a rusted chain and a sun-bleached sign, half swallowed by shrubs. Rangers patrol the area more often than seems necessary for a localized collapse. When pressed, one ranger gave a quiet, simple answer: because it still makes noise sometimes. At night, climbers camping near the rim say they've heard it, a low hum rising from the depths, pulsing like a slowed-down heartbeat, echoing off the walls. It starts so faint, you think you imagined it. Then, for a few seconds, it feels closer, like the canyon isn't just reflecting sound, it's generating it. Whatever fell silent in 1979 didn't stop moving. It just went deeper, beneath a trail that was never really unsafe for us, only too close to whatever beats under the stone. From a canyon where the rock hums back, we move to a mountain that remembers the exact second it broke and refuses to let that moment cool. Just before dawn on July 10th, 1999, Yosemite Valley shuddered. High above the forest floor, at a place called Glacier Point, a slab of granite the size of an apartment building tore free from the cliff. It plummeted into the trees near the Happy Isles Nature Center, exploding into boulders and dust, flattening trunks like matchsticks and ripping the trail apart. 4 people were injured, 2 barely escaped with their lives. The rockfall was violent and loud, but what survivors remember most isn't the crash. It's the warning that didn't make sense. One woman waiting near the trailhead said the air suddenly turned heavy and hot, as if someone had swung the sun around behind her back. Yet the real sun was still below the horizon. Another hiker described hearing a noise like a jet engine roaring from the face of the granite wall. He looked up, expecting a plane to scream overhead, but the sky was clear and empty. The sound wasn't in the air, it was inside the rock. The official report used familiar words: thermal expansion, pressure, natural failure, rock warms, rock cracks, rock falls. Except the temperatures that morning were cold, 48 degrees at ground level. The granite, somehow, had heated itself from within. When engineers studied the fragments afterward, they found edges that didn't act like broken stone. Some pieces were fused smooth as glass, welded together at their borders like metal that had been exposed to intense heat and then frozen mid-melt. Granite doesn't behave that way. It fractures. It shatters. It doesn't quietly soften and fuse. 2 months later, the Park Service fenced the area off and labeled it unstable. Trail closed. Geological hazard. Story over, at least for the public. But the ground stabilized. The big rockfalls stopped. What didn't stop were the readings. In 2001, thermal sensors mounted along the valley walls began picking up strange flashes, brief spikes of heat under the surface of the rock. Lasting less than a second, the team called them microflares. Every time one of these flares registered, nearby instruments monitoring the magnetic field went haywire. Compass needles jerked 40 degrees off true north, held for a heartbeat, then slid back. At first, the pattern looked random, then someone charted the times. The spikes were clustering in a narrow window, between 2 and 7 a.m., roughly every 11 days. No storms, no sun, no public explanation, just stone that seemed to be remembering how to burn. In 2004, a ranger working the night shift at Happy Isles recorded what he thought was distant thunder. 3 rumbles, evenly spaced, rolling through a clear sky. The next morning, the data showed another microflare had occurred behind the granite wall. By 2008, the exclusion zone was expanded. Hikers who skirted the boundary reported seeing faint red light flickering inside cracks in the rock, too steady and too localized to be reflection. Phones lost service, radios dissolved into static. The park never confirmed any of it. Then, in 2013, a group of climbers camping beyond the fence left a camera rolling. At 2:03 a.m., the granite itself seemed to glow, not blazing, not like a fire, but with a subdued inner light, as if something inside the stone were exhaling. The brightness pulsed, faded, and returned in slow waves, like breath. Geologists pointed to the quartz in the granite. Quartz can store energy, they said, and release it under pressure. Piezoelectric effects. It sounded reasonable until you remember that rocks don't usually glow on their own, and geological processes aren't known for keeping perfect rhythm. In 2017, during a maintenance inspection, workers touched the sealed rock face and pulled their hands back. The stone was warm. Thermal readings showed it was 18 degrees hotter than the surrounding cliff, despite sitting in shade all day. The official explanation? Solar retention, except there hadn't been any sunlight. Today, the Happy Isles rockfall zone remains off limits, its warning signs bleached by years of weather but still firmly planted. Closed. Geological hazard. That's the story you get. But hikers who pause near the boundary at night say they can feel a faint vibration underfoot, almost like standing next to a sleeping animal and feeling the rise and fall of its chest. Some call it pressure. Others think it's the mountain itself, replaying the moment it failed, over and over, storing heat and stress in ways we don't yet understand. Because if rock can burn without fire, glow without light, and pulse without a heartbeat, then maybe it isn't just the granite that's unstable. Maybe it's time, caught in the fault lines, refusing to move on. 6 trails, 6 locked doors in the middle of the wild. On the signs, the reasons all sound the same: erosion, instability, conservation. Words that make it feel like nature is the problem and we're just careful visitors. But after everything you've heard, those signs start to sound less like warnings about the land and more like warnings about what the land is hiding from us. A ghost town whose lights still flare to life in sealed cabins with no electricity. A sunken valley where a closed cave breathes in slow, mechanical rhythm. A desert fissure that hums and thrashes before earthquakes arrive. A drowned church that still sends out a bell pattern like a distress call from under the lake. A canyon trail erased from maps because something beneath the rock learned how to shine back. A granite wall that remembers the second it broke and keeps replaying its own collapse in pulses of heat and light. Officially, each place has a tidy line on a form. Structural instability, hazardous conditions, sensitive habitat. No camping, no entry, move along. But some reasons don't fit on government paperwork. Maybe these places were never truly abandoned. Maybe they're not ruins at all. But systems still switched on, running on cycles we don't have instruments to measure yet. Elkmont's cabins flickering like a heartbeat traveling through timber. White Oak Sink's hum mapped out like a pulse. Devil's Hole anticipating quakes like a nerve ending buried in the bedrock. Hazel Creek's lake chiming 2 short, 1 long, repeating the same plea over decades. Marble Canyon answering blows to the rock with a deeper ring from its underground stadium. Happy Isles warming itself in the dark, as if the mountain refuses to let that moment in 1999 become just the past. We like to think of national parks as preserved snapshots, frozen scenes in a glass case. But what if we've got it backwards? What if the trails we walk are the safest, quietest edges of something much more active and alive? Not monsters, not magic. Just a planet that stores memory in stone, water, and air, and sometimes replays it in ways that don't care whether we're watching. And what about the people in uniform? Maybe park rangers aren't just caretakers of trails and campsites. Maybe they're standing guard over the places where the land refuses to shut down, where bell tones still climb through water and heat still coils inside rock, where light still leaks from cracks at 2:47 a.m. We stay on the marked paths. We take our photos from the overlooks. We follow the arrows printed on brochures. It feels like we've seen the park. But behind every fence, every chained gate, every trail-closed sign, there's a path that didn't end. It just kept going down into flooded streets. Hollow chambers, vertical shafts, and fault lines that still hum quietly in the dark. 6 stories, 6 warnings carved into stone and pinned to wooden posts. If you made it this far, thank you. Now it's your turn. Tell us in the comments, which of these places would you still visit if the gates quietly swung open tomorrow, and which one do you hope stays sealed forever? And remember this, the next time you see a closed trail in a quiet corner of a national park, someone went too far once. The sign is there to keep you out. But it might also be there to keep something else in.